Welcome to Cybersecurity Career Week. My name is David Raymond. I am the director of the Virginia Cyber Range and the US Cyber Range. We're here at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. And this morning I'm going to host a Capture the Flag workshop. So I'm going to talk about Capture the Flag and how to approach different kinds of CTF challenges. This workshop is going to be recorded. So if you've got students who might be interested in this, I encourage you to share with students. Or if you want to use portions of this in class, then absolutely you're welcome to do that. I'm going to talk for an hour or so. I don't know, maybe a little bit more than an hour. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to demo some things along the way. So we will look at some challenges, and we will do some hands-on during the workshop. I'll do some hands-on. I'll sort of show you how to approach some of these challenges and some of the tools that you might use. And you know, you can sort of try to keep up with me. That would be wonderful. Or you can always take the recording later and go back and play pieces of it if you want to try out some of the tools on your own. But I'll try to do some hands-on things along the way, just so you see some of the tools. And I have my chat window up, so I'll try to keep up with the chat. It's on a different screen, so we'll see how I do with that. But you're welcome to jump in the chat, ask questions, and I'll try to answer questions along the way, and we'll just kind of see how this goes. All right, so we'll get kicked off here. First of all, the CTF is up and running, right? So we're hosting a CTF for Cybersecurity Career Week, and here's how you can find the CTF. If you go to your browser and go to https://go.vacker.io/careerweek, you will find the CTF. And Maureen just posted the CTF link to the chat. My wonderful outreach director, Maureen, she's online with us. So look in the chat, and you will find the link to the CTF. And when you get there, it looks like this, right? So it is a traditional Jeopardy-style CTF, and the way you get access to it is you click the enter button, and then you sign in using a Google account or a Microsoft account. I'm going to use my Google account. So here I am logging into the CTF, and this is what you see, right? So you have challenges across categories. Categories are here, and challenges are the green tabs. So now we're in the CTF, and you can start playing, and somebody's already solved a challenge, so we're already off to the races. All right, so that's how you get access to the CTF. And when you to play the game, you just pick a category, you click on a challenge, and then you find the flag and enter it. Sounds really straightforward. Maybe not so straightforward if you've never done this before, but we'll talk more about that as we go along. All right, so let me back up a little bit. What is Capture the Flag for folks who have not participated in Capture the Flag competitions before? Capture the Flag is a cybersecurity competition, and these can be individual or team-based, right? So this particular CTF we have set up today is an individual CTF, so everybody logs in. They're playing by themselves, and you can't create a team. You can have somebody sitting next to you working with you on the challenges, but on the CTF platform itself, at least for this competition, there are no teams. Some CTFs are team-based, so we can set up our platform to host team-based events where you can have multiple people organized on the same team, and those are great. Most of the CTFs that you participate in, like as a school club, or if you go to a conference or something, you play a CTF. Often they're team-based, and those can be really fun. If you're going to use them in the classroom as an instructor, you can do it any way you want, right? You can have it where each student is playing by themselves to sort of ensure that each student has to at least understand how to get through particular challenges in order to get to the flag, or you can set up as a team-based event. There are various formats for CTFs. And the one we're playing today is a Jeopardy-style CTF. And that name Jeopardy-style, if you're old enough to be interested in the game show Jeopardy, that's sort of where the name comes from. And in a Jeopardy-style CTF, you see categories, and then you have challenges in each one of those categories, and more difficult challenges are worth more points, right? So it looks very much like the game show Jeopardy. You have questions, more difficult questions have higher points associated with them. So these Jeopardy-style CTFs, these are probably the most popular CTFs. They're easier to manage, they're easier to set up, and it's easier to get a lot of participants playing. Like on this CTF, we could have many hundreds of participants playing at the same time, and it's no problem for us to host that. There are other kinds of CTFs, like you might have heard of like an attack defend CTF, or sometimes you hear those referred to as red-blue CTFs. Those CTFs they're wonderful. They're a great learning opportunity for students. They're a little bit harder to manage, especially when you have large numbers of people. You have to have infrastructure to support large numbers of players, and you have to have a scoring system that can support the flag capturing and providing scores for services that are operating and et cetera. So they're a little bit harder to set up, usually used in smaller groups, right? So at the Virginia Cyber Range and the US Cyber Range, we can host attack defend CTFs for like a classroom size, when you have small groups of students, each with their own small network that they're defending, and then they might be attacking other students at the same time. But this particular CTF is Jeopardy style. And these CTFs can be hosted by lots of different people, right? And there are lots of them out there. And as we get to the end of this workshop, I'm going to point you to some of those CTFs and where you can find them. Literally every weekend, there's a capture the flag competition going that you can play. And again, I'll point you to some websites that'll help you find those things. These are hosted by cybersecurity teachers and professors, right? So a lot of people are using these in the classroom these days. And at the Cyber Range, we support CTFs that teachers can use in the classroom. This CTF platform that we're using today is one that any teacher or professor who's a Virginia Cyber Range or US Cyber Range user, they can provision their own CTF and use it in the classroom. These are hosted also by college CTF teams. So that's been going on for probably 10 or 15 years, where there's a very sort of vibrant community of capture the flag teams in colleges across the country and around the world. And those college teams, lots of them host their own CTFs. Like, one weekend during the year, they'll host a capture the flag competition, and then people from other colleges and universities will play. And the next weekend, some other college or university, or maybe multiple, will be hosting a CTF that people will go and play. So it's all about sort of providing these opportunities for other college teams or high school students to come in and participate. CTFs are also hosted by companies looking for talent. So companies like Google and Facebook and others, they host CTFs, and they look for the students who have the highest scores, and then they try to recruit those students. It's very straightforward. They want students who understand cybersecurity concepts to come work for them. So that could be a wonderful way to find an internship or a job if you spend some time on CTFs and get really good at it and start doing some of these corporate CTFs. The Department of Defense and other government agencies do the same thing for the same reasons, right? They're trying to identify students and attract them to their organization looking for talent. So that's what capture the flag is. Okay, why are CTFs a good thing? They're really a fun way to learn about cybersecurity topics, right? So it's sort of billed as a competition, right? CTF competition, but really it's a learning opportunity. It's an educational opportunity. Students and others do capture the flag competitions to learn things. In fact, I've heard some students tell me that they learn more from a weekend capture the flag than they learn in some of their computer science courses. I mean, literally, you just can't do this without learning new things every time you do it. And so they're becoming very popular with high school and college clubs, and they're being, as I mentioned earlier, they're becoming more widely used in the classroom. I know faculty members at colleges and universities in the state of Virginia who use a CTF as the framework for their class, and it works really well. So my second bullet here, a well-designed CTF caters to a wide range of ability levels, right? So good CTFs have challenges that are relatively easy to obtain for new participants, and they have challenges that are more difficult, so that somebody who's coming back doing this, who've done this a few times, there's something interesting for them to work on, right? So it's not all about just having super hard challenges to test the most elite players, right? A well-designed CTF has this wide range of challenges to give everybody, something to work on. A well-designed CTF encourages independent learning, right? You have to learn something new oftentimes in order to solve some of these challenges, and so that's sort of the power of this whole theme of CTFs. Is it's really designed for an individual student to really dig in and learn new things in order to score points and do well in the CTF. And a well-designed CTF exercises real-world skills, right? The things that you do in a CTF are things like digital forensics, and so that's a real-world. Cybersecurity people do digital forensics as part of incident handling and as a part of criminal investigations. You do things like network packet capture analysis. That's a thing that cybersecurity analysts do every day. You do things like cryptography. Cryptography is an incredibly important part of cybersecurity. So you learn about cryptography and how it works and how it makes us build more secure systems. So these are all things that are real world skills, and they're things that you learn in a capture the flag competition. And then CTFs can be used for lots of different things. I just list some of them here, right? Team building events, skills assessment, teaching basic skills and problem solving. Lots of great ways that you can use a capture the flag. So CTF categories in this capture the flag competition are a little bit different than what you've seen before, right? So depending on how many CTFs you've done, right? So usually you have these standard categories of things like cryptography and digital forensics and binary exploitation and et cetera. This particular CTF is aligned with the NICE workforce framework job categories. And the idea here is to get students sort of digging into some of these workforce framework job categories and learning more about what these different people do in these categories. So you're going to see some sort of trivia questions related to the different categories. Students will have to dig in and find out about some of the cybersecurity jobs out there. And then some of those challenges are the kinds of cybersecurity activities that people in that particular workforce framework job category actually do on a daily basis, right? So under the investigate category, you might see something like a digital forensics challenge, for example. There's a question in the chat here. Are any studies that you're aware of analyzing learning outcomes of CTFs? Certainly, yeah. Those studies have definitely been done. If you do a little Googling, you'll find them. I don't have any at the tip of my tongue, but I recently submitted a grant proposal related to using CyberRange in the classroom. And one of the things we looked at was sort of demonstrating the power of hands-on activities like CTFs. And so there's certainly studies out there that show that these are a powerful tool, along with lots of other hands-on, kinds of classroom resources. If you're my feeling is that if you're teaching a cybersecurity class, you've got to have a hands-on component. If you don't, then I think the students aren't going to be very engaged, and you're going to scare people away from this topic, and that to me would be a disservice. So hands-on is really important for any STEM educational activity, including cybersecurity. Okay, so here are the themes, right? We have challenges that are in using the categories of the workforce framework. However, you'll see these common themes that you see in other CTFs, because these are the kinds of things that cybersecurity professionals do on a daily basis. You'll see things like trivia questions, right? You'll see cryptography questions, things related to websites, maybe vulnerable websites or things hidden in web traffic. You'll see networking challenges, reconnaissance challenges, forensics challenges, and then usually in a CTF you'll see my last category there, reverse engineering or binary exploitation. I don't think we have any of that stuff in this particular CTF. This one is is geared a little bit more towards the sort of, entry level to intermediate. Reverse engineering is usually a higher level skill set, and so I don't think we have any of that in this CTF. But I list that on the slide here, grayed out a little bit, because that's a challenge. That's a type of challenge that you'll often see in CTFs. So I'll talk about these different themes as I discuss approaches to solving different kinds of CTF challenges. Okay, so I'm going to start with some general tips. And these are general tips for solving any CTF challenge, right? So the first time you play a CTF, these are just some overall guidelines that I share often with students. First of all, in a Jeopardy-style CTF, the point values indicate the difficulty level, right? So easier challenges are going to have a lower point value, and so if you're a beginner, if you've never done this before at all, I would encourage you to probably start with the lower point value challenges. That doesn't mean that you won't be able to solve some of the higher point value challenges. And I would encourage you to look at those challenges. As you start to solve some of those low point value challenges and kind of build up your skills, the skills are intended to build on each other, and so you shouldn't be surprised if you've sort of learned enough along the way. Even if you've not done a lot of this, you'll learn enough along the way to solve some of those more difficult challenges. The second bullet here, the challenge name is almost always a hint. Challenge name is almost always a hint. So if you are playing a CTF and you get to a challenge where you're not even quite sure what you're supposed to do, right? Sometimes in a lot of CTF challenges, part of the challenge is just figuring out what you're supposed to do. And when people when they create CTF challenges, sometimes they make them kind of cryptic, and you have a challenge. It might have a file in it with not much explanation, and so again, the challenge name is often a hint. So if you Google that challenge name along with the category, you're likely to sort of be sent on a path towards a solution, right? That's a helpful initial approach. Of course, you should read the challenge description very carefully, and again, sometimes the challenge description is a little cryptic, and when you read it, you'll recognize it's a little cryptic, but usually you can kind of identify some key words in that challenge description. And again, if you Google the key words along with the category, often you're going to get some hints as to the approach to that particular kind of challenge. If there's a file, the file name might be a hint. Usually is some kind of a hint. Usually the file name is somehow related to the challenge. So think about the file name. Again, maybe you Google the file name along with the challenge category. That might be helpful. Sometimes file extensions are misleading. Sometimes you don't, the file is not what it purports to be, right? You might have file name.xls, and you say, okay, well, that's an Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to open it in Excel. And then you try to open an Excel and you get an error. And you think, oh, gee, maybe my Excel is broken. So you're trying to install a new version of Excel or whatever. And it turns out that just, the file extension is misleading. And so I'm going to talk about that here in a few minutes. How do you sort out that kind of a challenge? And I bring up that type of a challenge because it's kind of a trope. In almost any CTF you ever play, there's going to be at least one of these challenges where the file extension is wrong. That might get you directly to answering the challenge, or it might just be kind of a stepping stone along the way to the final solution. But you often see file extensions that are either missing or misleading. So what do you do in that case? Well, I'm going to show you what to do in a few minutes. I'll show you a couple of approaches to how you solve that kind of a challenge. But you can use Notepad. You can search for strings in the file. You can open a hex editor, and again, I'm gonna mention some of this stuff here in a minute. Getting towards the bottom here, are any names mentioned in the challenge? Obviously, if somebody's name is mentioned, then that's a hint, right? And the name is usually somebody who is, maybe they created some internet protocol. And so, you Google that person's name, you get their Wikipedia page, and you realize, okay, they created the FTP protocol, for example. So this challenge must have something to do with file transfer, the FTP system. Or it might be some cryptographer, some famous cryptographer, and you're like, okay, well, I Google the name, I find out that they created some cryptographic algorithm, and maybe I need to use that algorithm to solve this particular challenge. So names are important. It's also important to understand that the flag that you submit has to be, let's see if I can get my laser pointer here down at the bottom. The flag that you submit must match exactly or very closely to what the CTF challenge creator put as the flag, right? So if you spell something wrong, the flag's not going to match. The CTF system is not smart enough to recognize that you spelled something wrong. So we use these things called regular expressions to try to make it the answer system a little bit more forgiving. But the fact of the matter is, if you spell something wrong, then you're not going to get what you want. The best approach in cases where you can do this, the best approach is to sort of copy paste what you think the flag is, copy it from wherever you find it, and paste it into the CTF, and that sort of reduces the likelihood of you misspelling something. But just recognize that the flag you submit must match exactly. So when you put in the flag the first time and it says, no, that's not the right answer, I just encourage you to look at it more closely, maybe change the formatting a little bit, or make sure you spell things right or whatever, because it's got to match. Okay, those are general tips. Here's some more tips, even more, right? Sometimes challenges are solved more quickly if you're familiar with the Linux command line, especially as you get into more advanced capture the flag competitions, right? So this CTF, you'll be able to do probably 90% of it without worrying about Linux at all, right? You'll be able to use a web browser and maybe a couple of other software tools to solve almost all the challenges. But sometimes it's helpful to have to be familiar with the Linux command line and have a Linux command line at your disposal. And particularly when you move on to the more advanced capture the flag competitions. There's just some great tools in Linux that are super helpful, like the file command, the strings command, the grep command. Those are all different Linux command line tools that you can use to solve some challenges really quickly. And so there's some different options for having a Linux command line at your disposal. One of them is to use a CyberRange virtual machine, right? If you have access to a CyberRange, either at your school or at through some third party, if your students have access to a CyberRange, they can go on their Linux machine in the CyberRange. They can open up a web browser, log into the CTF like I just did on my Windows system, and get access that way, and you'll have that Linux command line. You can also use local virtualization, right? So some courses have students install tools like VirtualBox, and VirtualBox is a local virtualization solution that you can run on a laptop or desktop. And then using tools like VirtualBox, you can install a Linux virtual machine like the Kali Linux VM. So I have a couple of links here that you might find useful. If you want to install your own local virtual machine, you can do that on a general purpose computer, right? You cannot do that on a Chromebook, but you can do it on if you have a Windows or Mac desktop or laptop. You can use local virtualization. And then the last bullet here, there's this thing called the Windows subsystem for Linux. This is now part of Windows 10 and 11. It's relatively straightforward to install, and with the Windows subsystem for Linux, you can get a Linux terminal right on your Windows system. And I'll show you what mine looks like. I'm on a Windows 11 desktop computer right now. But here I have a terminal window that is running Linux, right? And it looks just like the Linux command line. Because it is, this is an Ubuntu terminal in Windows. So I'm not going to show you how to do that during this session today, but I'm going to point you to that and say, if you want to have a local Linux terminal on your Windows system, then Google this and you can get it set up in about 10 minutes on your Windows device. I use this Linux terminal all the time. It's super handy, especially if you're used to the Linux terminal and you want to have it for something like CTFs. I have a question in the chat here. Is there an AI component incorporated into these challenges? Is there an AI component? There's in the challenges that you'll see in this in this CTF that we provided, there is no AI component. Although you're welcome to use AI to solve some of the challenges if you want to. I think AI is a great tool, and there's certainly no rules against using AI or any other tool that you can find to help solve some of these things. Okay. So I talked about file identification a minute ago, and so what if a challenge includes a file, but you don't know what to do with it? Sometimes file extensions are left off. Sometimes the file extensions are wrong. It's just the CTF challenge author is trying to point you in the wrong direction. How do I identify what kind of a file it is? If I know what kind of a file it is, then I know what tool I might be able to open up that file with, right? That's the important bit of file extensions. If you're not familiar with file extensions, usually at least on a Windows system, there are these 3 or 4 characters after a dot that indicate what kind of a file it is, and Windows actually hides a lot of that from you these days. So you might not even see many file extensions. That makes it even more difficult if you pull a file down to your Windows system and you're clicking on it, trying to open it up, and your Windows system thinks it's a Word document, and you don't see the file extension to say, hey, that's incorrect. You can set Windows so that you can see file extensions. I'm not going to show you how to do that right now, but that's a pretty straightforward thing that you can change in Windows File Explorer. But okay, so what if you have a file and you don't know what to do with it? I'm going to talk briefly about file types and how you identify the type of a file. The things you can do, you can use the Linux, and in a minute I'm going to do this hands-on and show it to you. You can use the Linux file command. So if I have a Linux terminal and I say file readme.txt, it's going to tell me what kind of a file it is, right? So here in this example, it tells me that this is a PDF document. Okay, it's not a text file, even though the file extension says .text, it's a PDF. I could open it in a hex editor, right? So over here, I have this program installed on my Windows device that is called HXD, and I can use that tool to look at the first few bytes of the file. And the first few bytes of a file are what are referred to as a file signature, or sometimes you'll hear this referred to as magic numbers. And so if you have a file, you don't know what it is, you don't know what kind of a file it is, what application you should use to open it. If you open it in the hex editor and look at those first few bytes, you can do some pretty light Google searching, and you can figure out what kind of a file it is. So let's do that. A little hands-on here. So we're going to look at the category of investigate. And there's a challenge called README. And the challenge prompt says, can you read me and find the flag? Okay, so there's this file download, readme.txt. So I'm going to go to my CTF, and I'm going to go investigate. And here's the challenge. It's called README. Click on the challenge, and it says, can you read me and find the flag? And here's the file, readme.txt. So I click on the file, and here it is. It's downloaded. And so I would think, okay, well, I'm gonna I'm going to click on it and open it up, right? So let me go to I'll find my Windows Explorer, and here's downloads, and I have this file called readme.txt, and I double click on it, and I look at it, and it's like, oh my gosh, what is this? This is not text, right? And I could stare at this for a while. Maybe I would try to read every line and see if I could find something that looks like a flag, but this is not a text file, obviously. So I've been misled. Okay, so how do I solve this? Well, again, if I go to the terminal window, here's my terminal. I need to go to the right place in order to open that file, right? And I downloaded it. When I downloaded it using Chrome, the Chrome web browser on my Windows system, it went into my downloads folder. So when I go to my Windows, when I go to my Windows File Explorer, I'm in downloads, and here's readme.txt. Okay, well, so I need to get there on my Linux terminal, so I'm gonna do that. And it's here's how to get to it. And now I'm in my downloads folder, right? So I'm on my C drive users directory, Raymond D. That's my account on this system. And here I am in the downloads folder. This is the file path that gets me there. And I do my ls, and now there's readme.txt. And I could cat that file, readme.txt, and I see that same bunch of gobbledygook in the terminal window. But a neat thing I can do here is I can say file readme.txt, and this will tell me that readme.txt is actually a PDF document. So the file command in Linux will do this analysis for me. It'll look at the file. It'll look at that signature at the beginning of the file, and it's going to tell me what kind of what file type it is. Okay, but this requires that I have a Linux terminal, which we don't all have a Linux terminal at our disposal, right? So this is one way to solve this challenge. I'm gonna show you another way to solve this particular challenge. So I'm going to use a different piece of software, and that the piece of software is on my slide here. If I go back to my slide, there's this hex editor tool that you can install on a Windows system called HXD. This is Windows software. If you're using your Linux system and you wanted to use a hex editor, you could use this thing called HexEdit. If you're going to use an Apple device, there are hex editors you can download for that too. You could do a little Googling and find it. So I'm going to open this software called HXD on my Windows system. Here it is. And I'm going to open, I need to open it's in my downloads folder, right? So here it is, readme.txt. Okay, and here's the file. And if I look at the first few bytes here, what I can do is I can go to, first of all, with a PDF, the file signature is really easy to identify, because it's actually, if you look it over here on the right-hand side of here you have the hexadecimal bytes. This might be hard to see. I don't know if I can. I'm not going to try to blow this up, but here's the hexadecimal bytes: 25, 50, 44, 46. Over on the right-hand side here, you have the decoded text. This is the ASCII equivalent of these bytes. Here you can see the PDF. It says PDF 1.5, so that's probably the version number. So for a PDF document, it's easy to identify the magic number or the file signature. It's not always so easy. So if you just have this value here, right, I can copy that, and I will go to my Google's, and I'm gonna I'm going to type in file signature, and here's my file signature, right? 2550 4446, and you'll get lots of returns on file signatures. The one I use the most, there's one up here at the top here, Gary Kessler Associates. I don't know who that is. Wikipedia has a great file signature list, so I'm just going to go to Wikipedia, and here's file signatures for each for all these different kinds of file extensions, and you know, you probably don't recognize that they're like just hundreds of different file types. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a Control F, and I'm going to search for that particular file signature, and here I see that it's a PDF document, right? So this is the other approach. If you don't have the file command at your disposal, you can use a hex editor to find that file signature. And so, okay, now that I have the file signature, now that I know what kind of a file it is, how do I actually open it? And so let's go back to our downloads folder. I'm gonna rename this thing, right? So if I right click and I say rename, I'm going to change it to a PDF file. Now it's readme.pdf, and when I try to do that, Windows is going to try to stop me, right? Because it thinks I'm doing the wrong. It thinks I'm going to break the file by giving it a file by changing the file extension. Actually, I'm fixing the file, but Windows doesn't know that. It gives me a warning. Are you sure you want to change it? I say yes. Now you can see I get the little icon here. Now my system recognizes that it's a PDF file, and if I open that file, there's the answer, right? There's the flag. I don't know if I can see if I can blow this up. Here we go. Yeah, so there it is, right? Here's your flag. And now I could copy this and paste it into my thing here. And I don't know if it pasted in there quite right. Probably doesn't look like it. Anyway, yeah, it didn't paste right from my PDF, so I would have to fix this. But that's the answer, right? It's this leet speak. You know, here's your flag, and it's got some threes in it, and etc. All right, so that's what you do if you don't know what the file extension is, or if the file extension is wrong, or you know, somebody's trying to trick you. Those are the approaches. This is the link to the Wikipedia page on file signatures, or you just Google it. Okay, so we went through the sample challenge, and this is the answer. I encourage you to go through that whole process yourself. Don't just use my answer. Right, go through it yourself so you know how to do it, and so you have the right tools installed. So if you see that again, you'll have what you need. Okay, so there's trivia challenges. This is a type of challenges that you're going to see. Trivia challenges can encompass a lot of different category names. In this particular CTF, you're going to see trivia challenges across all the categories. Again, because part of the point here is to familiarize students with some of these different work roles. The kinds of things you'll see in trivia challenges are sort of basic user awareness kinds of stuff. You'll see introductory cybersecurity concepts. You'll see careers, might even be non-cybersecurity topics, just to make it interesting. You know, in most of the big CTFs that we host at the Cyber Range, we'll have some like sci-fi category, because it just turns out that a lot of CTF students are interested in sci-fi, and so, you know, some of them think that's kind of fun to test their sci-fi skills and answer challenges about, you know, old sci-fi movies or books or whatever. And so trivia challenges are good for the classroom, right? I guess as an instructor, it's useful to understand that that CTFs can be used not only for sort of hands-on technical skills, but you can also use them for things like trivia, or you know, just the vocabulary of cybersecurity can be part of CTF challenges. So you'll see things like this, right? The introductory concepts of cybersecurity, like the CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, availability. Things like malware, different kinds of malware. There might be questions about ransomware or adware or spyware or whatever. You might have trivia challenges that are career oriented, right? So this CTF has some career related questions, and you might find some of those answers in places like this website called Cyberseek. Cyberseek is a great tool that shows the connections between different cybersecurity careers and the skill sets needed for different jobs in this space. And so that's a good thing to point students to. There's the Workforce Framework website, and I provide the link here on the page, right? So this I pasted on top of the web page, the screenshot for the web page. If you Google the Workforce Framework or NICE Workforce Framework, this is going to be one of the top results. But it's at this website that is the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Careers and Studies, and that is on CISA's website. So nix.cisa.gov, Workforce Development NICE Framework. And what you see on that webpage is the categories, right? So I only see one of them here, but if I were able to scroll down on this webpage, let's see if I can click on that link. I don't think if I click on the link, yeah, there we go. If I scroll down, I see here's all the specialty areas on the Workforce Framework, all the categories. And then within the categories, you can see the specialty areas, and you can dig into these different things. So this is a great resource for use in the classroom if you're talking to students about cybersecurity careers, and you'll get answers to some of these challenges on that from that website. I already talked about Cyberseek. Okay, so here's a sample challenge. The categories oversee and govern. The challenge is called use it or lose it. And here's the prompt. This principle of the cybersecurity CIA triad has to do with ensuring that information can be used when and where needed. And if I go to oversee and govern, use it or lose it, I'll give you a second to think about this. Then remember the CIA triad. If you don't remember what that is, you could just Google it. One of the foundational concepts in cybersecurity. So if I were to Google CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and principle that has to do with ensuring that information can be used when and where needed. And so the answer here is, if I go to my CTF, I think it's probably availability. And there we go. I got 6 points. All right, so trivia challenges, good stuff. All right, let's think about some crypto. Another kind of challenge that you'll see in this CTF, you'll see some, I think you'll probably see some cryptography related challenges. And so with crypto challenges, these are interesting. You're usually provided with some encoded message or some some encrypted message and some hint as to the encoding. And it turns out that many challenges are not really encryption at all, but they're encodings, and there's a subtle difference there, and that subtle difference might be lost on young students. Encodings are used in computer science to put data in different formats for different reasons. So there's this encoding called ASCII, ASCII. ASCII is used to take alphanumeric characters and encode them using numbers, right? So of course computers operate in numbers. They operate as binary digits, ones and zeros, and in order to represent letters of the alphabet using numbers, you have to have some encoding mechanism, and that one of those encoding mechanisms is this thing called ASCII. And if you look at an ASCII table, you'll see each alphanumeric character in the alphabet is aligned with a number, and usually those ASCII tables will show you the decimal number and the hexadecimal number associated with that particular letter. So ASCII is an encoding system that you often see in CTFs. You have this other encoding system called base 64 or base 32. Those are two different encoding systems. Those are used to take certain kinds of data and make them easier to transmit on using some of the network protocols that we use to send data from one computer to another. Some of those protocols are limited in how they operate, and in order to send certain kinds of data, it's easier to put those in a different format. And so those things are not encryption, right? If you know the encoding, you don't need any kind of a password or key. You just have to convert that encoding to whatever the ASCII equivalent is and enter that as the flag. Some cryptography challenges are, they're not really encryption, they're encodings, and these are some of the encodings. Some crypto challenges use monoalphabetic ciphers, right? So simple ciphers like a Caesar cipher or a rotation cipher, where you just rotate the alphabet a few characters and you get to the plain text answer. You also have monoalphabetic substitution ciphers, where you have a single character replaced by another character. It's not necessarily just a shift of the alphabet, but it's a one-for-one replacement. And so that's a relatively simple cipher. Those are usually sort of easy to crack, right? They're relatively low point value challenges because they're fairly easy to crack. In fact, there's lots of websites out there. I'll point you to some websites. There's lots of websites out there that'll sort of automate that process for you. All these monoalphabetic ciphers are easily solved without the key, because you can do this thing called frequency analysis, right? We look at which, what's the most widely used, what's the character that you see the most in the encrypted message, and that's probably going to align with the mostly used characters in the English language, which are things like T and S and E and et cetera. So those are the simple cryptography challenges. They get more difficult when you do things like when you have things like polyalphabetic ciphers. And here's a list of different polyalphabetic ciphers. If you have a challenge that is a polyalphabetic cipher, usually what you'll get is some hint as to the cipher that's being used, and usually some hint as to what the key might be, because these polyalphabetic ciphers, they all have to have some key associated with them in order to solve. And then you have transposition ciphers. So these are different, right? With polyalphabetic ciphers, you're replacing characters with other characters. With a transposition cipher, you are not replacing characters with another. You're actually transposing characters. So that's different, right? You're shifting characters around. So here's an example of a transposition cipher, is this thing called a rail fence cipher, right? So here's the plain text. The United Kingdom is what it says if you read it up and down. But when I encode this with a 3-rail fence, you would transmit it line by line, right? So TNDG, HUIEK, etc. And so when the receiver gets it, it just looks like a bunch of garbled letters. But if you were the receiver and you knew that this was a 3-rail fence, then it would be fairly straightforward to reproduce it like this, right? So, so here we're not replacing characters with other characters. We're shuffling things around. We're transposing things, right? And so when you look at these, you say, well, these are sort of toy ciphers, right? These are not really how the internet works with cryptographic algorithms. The fact of the matter is, this is exactly how it works, right? Modern cryptographic algorithms are based on basic character substitution and transposition. Those are the two techniques that are used to underpin all modern symmetric ciphers. And so understanding this whole notion of substitution and transposition is, if students are going to be doing advanced cryptography later in their cybersecurity studies, they got to understand these basic concepts of it. There's other resources out there. I point you to a website here. There's some great Khan Academy stuff on intro to cryptography. So lots of resources out there if you want to get your students started down this road. Of course, the more advanced cryptography challenges use some of the modern cryptographic methods, right? And I list some of those different encryption techniques here. You're going to see these kinds of challenges in like a collegiate CTF where you might have a poorly implemented version of some cryptographic algorithm that like leaks data in some way. And so the students have to figure out, how the crypto system is broken and how to solve those things. You also might see challenges that use hashing, or if you have a challenge that is like password cracking, then that uses cryptographic hashing. And there's some tools out there for cracking those. I list some of them here. These are probably the two most widely used tools for password cracking. One's called John the Ripper. One's called Hashcat. They're both very powerful, and eventually, if your students get or if you get more involved in CTFs, you're going to be using these kinds of tools. Here's some great resources for crypto challenges. I'll leave this up just for 10 seconds so you can take a screenshot if you'd like. Again, this session is being recorded, and we'll post the recording in the next day or two, so you can go back and reference this anytime you want to. But these are the resources I use for crypto challenges. Okay, here's a sample challenge. I'm not going to do it live. We're timing wise, we're running a little bit late, but the challenge category is analyze. It's a shift cipher. Here's the prompt. The prompt is, what's the password? And here is the message. And so if you the challenge name again is pretty straightforward. This is telling you what kind of a cipher this is. And so if you take this very hard to read encrypted message, and you go to one of these tools that will help you solve a shift cipher, then this is pretty straightforward. Using a website to solve it. And I'm going to quickly go past the answer here because I want you to just do it yourself, right? Go to a website and do it yourself. Of course, you can watch the recording later and pause it where I skipped ahead there. Okay, here's another challenge type is web challenges. These are challenges that rely on some basic understanding of the web and how the World Wide Web functions, and how websites work, right? And a lot of students don't, but when the web first came out, and I was a student, we learned how to write HTML because that's how you created web pages. You wrote HTML, and HTML is still the framework upon which web pages are created. And here's an example on the left side of the slide here, right? If you go to the Google website today, google.com, this is what you see. And if you view the page source, you see the HTML that underpins that website. And there it is, HTML. And then there's the header section, there's the body, and here's the close tags, and it's HTML just like it was back in the 90s. A little bit more advanced, lots more scripts, but it's still HTML. And so if you have some basic understanding of HTML and how the web works, you can solve some of these web challenges pretty easily. Of course, some of the advanced challenges require you to dig a little bit deeper. You have to understand how web applications work. So that's kind of another layer, right? So some approaches to solving web challenges: you can view the page source like I do here. That's on the menu, right? If you click the menu up in the corner of Google Chrome, you can view page source. You can open the developer panel. That's another menu item on your web browser. You can examine the network traffic. This can be really interesting. Sometimes there's network traffic that you don't actually see on the web page, either on the web page or even in the page source. because there's a bunch of header data that goes back and forth between a web client and a server. And so if you can examine network traffic using a tool like Wireshark, you might be able to solve a challenge. You can use this Linux command line tool called curl. So curl lets you examine web page headers and all, right? Use the curl tool at the Linux terminal. You can look at the robots.txt file. I'm not going to talk a bunch about that, but that's something that can be pretty interesting. You might be able to do a directory traversal attack. This was something that lots of early websites were very vulnerable to. You could navigate around on the file system of a web server using directory traversal right in the URL bar here. If you're familiar with PHP or JavaScript, you can leverage vulnerabilities in those scripting languages and get some things out of the web server that you're not supposed to. And then you might be able to use what's called an injection attack, like SQL injection or command injection. Those are things. Anytime you have a web page where there's like a place where you can type something in, could be vulnerable to one of these different kinds of injection attacks. So these are some approaches to solving web challenges. And here's kind of the basics, right? HTML is a markup language, and you have this basic framework of tags, right? So the beginning of the page always has an HTML tag, and then at the end of the page you have this close HTML tag, and then you have the header section, head, close head, and then you have the body section. Then in the body you have all kinds of stuff, and you can put things in comments, right? So this is a comment. Almost every programming language has a way to put in comments, and the comments are something that in HTML, comments are not seen on the web page. Similarly, in a program, comments are not portions of the executed program, but they're comments in the code, so that somebody reading the code knows what's going on. And this is what a comment looks like in HTML. And some of the entry level web CTF challenges, they'll just have the flag right in a comment. So back in the old days, back in the early days of the web, it was much more difficult to exploit web pages because they were very simple, right? You have your browser on your laptop or desktop, and when you open your browser and you type in a URL, what happens is there's this HTTP GET request that's sent to the web server, and the web server is going to look in its file system, and it's going to find the file that you're looking for, right? A web page is just a file on a web server. And so the web server is going to find the file. It's going to send that file back to the web browser, and then the web browser is going to essentially render. It's going to interpret that HTML file and it's going to render it in your browser. So this is the text. This is just a text file over here, but it becomes this when your browser pulls it up. Well, nowadays things are much more complicated, right? And anytime you make things more complicated, you introduce potential security vulnerabilities. So nowadays, when you open your browser and you go to Google, you do an HTTP GET for google.com, you get this page. Well, this turns out that this is a form. This is not just a web page. This is a form where you can type things in. And anytime you can type things in, that the web server is going to do something on your behalf based on what you typed in. So basically, you type something in, that message is posted back to the web server. Now the web server might look in a database to find whatever you typed into that search bar, and if it's looking in a database, then if you know structured query language, which is the languages of databases, then you can use SQL queries to potentially get things out of the database that you're not supposed to be able to get, right? That's sort of an unintended use of this kind of a form. But again, if you know how to do it, you can get things out of there that you're not supposed to. And then the results are sent back and you get back, something based on what you did here. Okay, so those are web challenges. And I'm not going to talk too much more about web challenges. There might be one or two of them in this CTF. Here is networking challenges. So we're going to talk about networking challenges here for a minute. There's a question in the chat that says, will you be able to email those links? We're not going to email the links. What we are going to do is we're going to share this recording so that you can get to it. So look for the recording, and these links will all be on there. So challenge. So networking challenges is all about packet capture, looking in network packet captures to find flags, right? And sometimes you have to carve files out of the network packet capture. Sometimes you have to, you'll find some encrypted message in the packet capture. There's a variety of different things, but the sort of the heart of it is you will download a packet capture file. Usually has the file extension PCAP, and then you open it with a tool that lets you examine network traffic. And there's multiple tools out there. I list some of them here. The most widely used tool that is available in Windows, Mac, and Linux is this tool called Wireshark. This is super powerful. It's very well supported. It reads all kinds of different network protocols. One slight limitation is that it's a GUI tool, right? It's GUI. It's graphical user interface. So the only problem with that is if you have a really big packet capture file, the graphical user interface can be it can get bogged down, right? Because it's just that's how GUIs are, right? It can kind of get slow to function if you have a lot of data you're examining. So if you have a huge packet capture file, you can use Wireshark. But if you'd like to examine other tools, there are some other things like TCP dump or WinDump, or this thing called ngrep, network grep, other tools that you can use to examine packet capture. Those are all command line tools, very powerful. But if you're an entry-level CTF participant or even an intermediate CTF participant, Wireshark is going to be your best friend for any PCAP file. With Wireshark, you can do this thing called display filters. So you can look for very specific kinds of information in the even if you have a huge file, right? You might have a file with thousands and thousands of packets in it, and there's only like a handful of packets that are interesting for a particular challenge. But if you know the protocol that the challenge is related to, like it might be an HTTP challenge, or it might be an FTP challenge. If you know the protocol, then you can use packet filters or display filters to narrow down on the specific packets that you need to see in order to solve that challenge. And so what you do is you put in your filter here, and then you apply, and then it's gonna narrow down the packets that you see. And I'm gonna pull up a challenge here in Wireshark in just a second, so I can show you the basics of how to use the tool. But you get this list of packets, and then if you select a packet, you get a bunch more detailed information on the packet. And the filters are very powerful, right? You can do lots of different stuff with display filters, and I'm not going to go into those details today. But as you get involved in more advanced networking challenges, you'll really start to understand the power of Wireshark and what it can do. The common protocols that you should be focused in on if you're solving a networking challenge are the ones I list here, right? You're going to be looking for things like in the clear web communications, right? HTTP. You might be looking at FTP, file transfer protocol, or tiny FTP. You might be looking at Telnet. You might be looking at some basic, email ports. These are all unencrypted traffic, right? Some things you can usually ignore when you're solving networking challenges are the secure protocols. These are all encrypted, right? HTTPS, SSH, SFTP, SMTP, those are all encrypted traffic, unless you think that the challenge requires you to break the encryption, which is pretty rare. Some of the very advanced networking challenges might give you a path to breaking the encryption. but in most cases, particularly in entry level to intermediate CTFs, you're not going to have to break any encryption. So the packets you should be looking for are these unencrypted protocols. That helps you narrow it down a lot, right? You might have a packet capture file that has hundreds of web page references, but if they're all HTTPS, then you can just ignore all of them and focus on the port 80 HTTP traffic, and that might narrow you down to just a handful of packets that'll get you to a solution. Okay, here's an example challenge. Categories: operate and maintain. Challenge name is Ethernet to IP. And here's the prompt. This one's kind of longer, right? Challenge prompt. What is the internet protocol address of the host at this hardware address in the packet capture file provided? Here's a hint. Hint number 1. The IP address is a sequence of 4 numbers between 0 and 255, separated by periods. Hint number 2, use Wireshark for this. It is available for download at this link. Okay, so for students who are not familiar with any networking at all, this, you might spend you could spend a whole class talking about this very straightforward entry-level networking challenge, just because concepts are all new, right? The students won't know. They won't know what an Ethernet address is. This is an Ethernet address. They won't know what an IP address is. But after they do this, they'll have some understanding of what those things mean. I'm going to go to the CTF, and what's the category again? Operate and maintain. Okay, operate and maintain. Here we go. And here's the challenge: Ethernet to IP. Okay, so here's that text I just read. What's the IP address of the host at this address and the attached packet capture? Here's the hints. So I'm gonna click on lookup.pcap. Okay, so I downloaded the file, and I have Wireshark installed. So when I select that file, it's going to open up Wireshark. And this is probably the simplest packet capture you'll ever see. It's only got 2 packets. And this happens to be a DNS request and response. So DNS is a domain name system. That's the tool on the internet that's used to translate domain names to IP addresses. And so I typed wired.com into my web browser. My web browser reached out to a DNS server to find out what the IP addresses are that are wired, that are associated with wired.com. That has nothing to do with how to solve this challenge, but that's what those 2 packets are. So very simple exchange between a client system, my web browser, and a DNS domain name service server. And so if I go back to my challenge here, it says, what's the IP address of the host at this MAC address or Ethernet address? So here's my PCAP. So 005056. Okay, so I have my packets listed up here. If I select one of those packets, down here on the lower left side, I see the TCP/IP layers here, and at the top, at the application layer, I have the domain name system, but that's not what this question is about. Here I have the UDP portion of the packet. That's not what this question is about. It's asking me about Ethernet addresses and IP addresses, and so if I go to the internet header here, I can find this Ethernet address that is 005056 EDC2E2. Okay, so if I look here, 005056 EDC2E2. Okay, so that's this right here, right? 005056 EDC2. Okay, so that's the destination. That's the destination Ethernet address. And so to find the corresponding IP address, I need to open up the IP layer here, and I need to look at the destination address. Okay, so destination Ethernet address is here. So the destination IP address is here, 192.168.28.2. That's my answer. And if I were to type that in, that would give me my points, right? So, but that's kind of the basics of how you use Wireshark. You see the packets up top, and you select a packet, and then you can drill into the details. And again, this particular challenge is just having me do this basic translation between Ethernet address and IP address. Other challenges might have you looking for something else in here, or you might have to find some file and carve the file out of the network traffic. And that's something that I'm not going to talk about today, but pretty cool. It's interesting to understand that if you send a file over the network, if somebody is capturing your network traffic, then that file is in that network traffic, and you can pull it out of there using tools like Wireshark. Okay. Okay, and then reconnaissance challenges. I'm not going to talk about this much. These are you can kind of think of these like trivia challenges, right? Usually it's about general problem solving, and they're not necessarily trivia, but they're sort of you have kind of a trail of clues, and you reach the final flag by following some breadcrumb trail. And probably the most useful tool you'll ever use for reconnaissance challenges is just using Google, right? You can find what you need using Google or whatever your search engine of choice is, DuckDuckGo or Bing or what have you. Or you might try to use AI, right? That's you probably ChatGPT may be super useful in some of these reconnaissance challenges. Okay, I'm gonna kind of blow past this, but here's a challenge, and you can do that at your own leisure. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap up here in the next 5 or 8 minutes just by talking about some CTFs that you or your students can get involved in to learn more about capture the flag. These are some high school competitions that are generally annual competitions that you can use. One of them is called Pico CTF. That is a great high school level cybersecurity competition. It's hosted by Carnegie Mellon. It's a collaboration between their video game program and their cybersecurity club, and annual CTF hosted by Carnegie Mellon. And it's open all year, right? So like this year's CTF or whatever, last year's CTF is available for you to play this year to practice for the next year. It's so if you go to your web browser and search the Googles for Pico CTF, it's comes right up, and you can learn lots about it, and you can log in and start using it, right, as a learner or a teacher. So great online CTF can be played by students anywhere, and generally there's a new version every year, but the previous version is available, so you can play whatever last year's game. So great CTF. There's one called HS CTF out there that kind of comes and goes. It used to be an annual CTF. Now it's maybe not annual anymore. It just kind of depends on the students who are hosting it and what their capabilities are. There's a great annual CTF hosted by Radford University here in Virginia called RU Secure CTF. This is a nationwide competition. It's targeted at high schoolers and community colleges for the most part. There's 3 rounds. They have a preliminary round, qualifying round, and then they actually bring people to Radford University to do the in-person finals, and they have some pretty good prizes. Then there's Cyber Patriot, which is not a Jeopardy-style CTF. It's a little bit different kind of a competition, but this is something that I would encourage if you have students who are interested in cybersecurity competitions. Cyber Patriot is a good thing to get involved in. Lots of collegiate and professional competitions out there. Literally every weekend there's a CTF that students can play. Here's some of the really good ones. I won't dwell on this because I think maybe most of us are in the K-12 space, but these are some great college and professional competitions. There's this website called ctftime.org, and this is a great resource. It's a repository of CTF related information. I'm going to pull up the website here on my browser, ctftime.org. And I'm just going to kind of walk you around a little bit so you know what this is all about. So this website dates back to 2011. And what you see here on the upper left is you see this is the ranking, the annual ranking of like top tier CTF teams. And so what happens is these teams play these competitions as they come up weekend after weekend, and the top teams are like ranked. And so if you're in the top 10 of this list, these are some like elite professional or collegiate capture the flag teams. What you see here on the left, lower left-hand corner, is upcoming events. So I mentioned almost every weekend there's a CTF to play. Here are upcoming events. There's Def Camp Capture the Flag 2023 quals. This is this weekend, October 20th. So it's Friday to Sunday. This is not unusual, Friday to Sunday. Lots of these CTF are basically 48 hours. They'll start on Friday evening. They'll go till Sunday evening. Why do they go Friday to Sunday? Because collegiate CTF teams will play these the entire weekend. I used to be when I taught at West Point. I created the CTF team there. These kids would play Friday to Sunday. I'm the faculty advisor for the Virginia Tech CTF club, and they'll play all weekend. So this weekend there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different CTFs going on. So again, literally every weekend, and anybody, almost all of these can be played by anybody who wants. You just go to their website, and you register, and you can, okay, here's the official URL. Yeah, here it is. I put it in my email, I register, and then when the CTF starts, I log in and start playing. And so these are not, most of them are not restricted at all. Anybody can play. Anybody can create a team and play, right? So upcoming CTFs are here. New write-ups are down here. So as people play these CTFs, particularly these elite teams, right? What they do is they create write-ups. They write up the solutions to the challenges, and they post them online on their website. And so if you do a challenge this weekend, and or you do a competition this weekend, and there were challenges that you couldn't solve, then next week you look at the write-up, right? And that's how these CTF clubs and teams operate. They will play a CTF on a weekend, and then they will, during the week, they will, the members of the group will talk about the challenges that they solved and how they solved them. And then they'll also talk about challenges that they didn't solve, they couldn't figure out, and they'll look at these write-ups. Super helpful for CTF teams who are getting started, or advanced CTF teams. I mean, this is a great resource. Over here, we have past events, right? On this website, they have past events going back to 2011, including the challenges and the write-ups. So you can go back and look at CTFs that were executed years ago and find not only the challenge itself, but also the write-up. So how do you solve that challenge? That stuff is all available here on this website, CTF Time. Super, super useful. So anybody that's getting the CTF team up and running, this is the place to go. It's a great resource. Okay, that's CTF Time. If you want to host your own, there are resources out there to host your own CTF, right? So if you're comfortable standing up and running your own web server, you could download something like CTFD. This is a CTF platform that's been around for 10 or 12 years. Excuse me, probably 10 or 12 years. Originally created by a student at NYU Poly in New York City. He continues to maintain it, and you can download it from GitHub. You can download this framework from GitHub. And if you're comfortable standing up your own web server, you can use this framework to host your own CTFs. There's also a tool called Facebook CTF that you can download, and it's kind of similar. It has some questions integrated, and so if you want to host your own, this is a good tool. If you want to pay somebody, right, you can pay somebody to host a CTF for you. So CTFD also has a paid version where you can have CTFD host CTFs for you. Meta CTF is a company that's right here in Virginia, created by some UVA students, and they host CTFs for all kinds of different events. It's a paid service. The US Cyber Range, us here at the US Cyber Range at Virginia Tech, we host CTF platforms, everything from just a bare bones platform where you create your own challenges up through like curated, tailored CTFs based on your specifications. We'll do the whole range. And so if you're interested, you can go to our website, uscyberrange.org, or you can reach out, contact@uscyberrange.org, and we'll get somebody to help you out. Okay, here's the link again to the CTF. I encourage people to get in here and solve these challenges. I want to look at the scoreboard, just see how we're doing as we get going here. Cancel scoreboard, oh, look at this. Nice. Somebody's going after it, which is great. There's lots more challenges to solve, right? So get after it. And I'm glad to see we have lots of players right now. So please play the CTF. We're happy to host this CTF in support of our friends at NICE and NIST. And this is hosted by the Virginia Cyber Range. We also run an operation called the US Cyber Range. So if you're interested in having us host a CTF like this for your students, then please reach out. And whether you're in Virginia or anywhere else in the country, we help out lots of educators with our platform. Okay, so I'm going to look at the chat here just for a minute to see if there's any questions. And so if you don't have any questions, you're welcome to go. Thanks for joining us. We'll provide this recording sometime in the next couple of days once it's ready for us to package up and send it on. And if you have questions, please throw them in the chat, and I'll stay here just for a couple of minutes to answer some questions. What are some future capabilities for CTFs that you would like to see that are not already there? That's a good question. We ask that question all the time. What are some capabilities that you would like to see that are not already there? In our platform, we have support for multiple choice questions. So you might see some multiple choice questions here in this CTF. I don't remember, but yeah, capabilities that aren't already there. I don't know. I would love to hear that from people because our CTF platform, recreated it. We own it, so we can modify it however we want to, and we definitely will take any feedback anybody has. What module is the shift cipher question located? What module is the shift cipher question? Yeah, I don't remember what module or what category. I'm looking here. Now I can't find it, right? Analyze, maybe. No, I can't find it. I'm not sure. You'd have to peruse the categories. But I don't know. It's out there somewhere. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and good luck with the CTF. If you have questions about the CTF, you can reach out to our support team at contact@uscyberrange.org. And with that, good luck and have a great cybersecurity career week. So thanks.